So without further ado, Elisa Lindinger, welcome to EUNIC DX AI Week. The digital stage is now yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Caroline and Julian. Yeah, hi everyone. After this great introduction, let me cut it short. My name is Elisa Lindinger, and today I'm joining you from Berlin, out of my home office to wherever you are right now, in your offices, in your homes, or even while you're commuting. All our lives have changed in the past year. I think it's safe to say that. We are now trying to physically distance and at the same time turn to the digital to connect with others. We now check in with our loved ones on video calls instead over a cup of coffee. We meet in digital meeting rooms with our colleagues. We do our work from the dining table or the living room at home. At home, where spouses, kids, or flatmates compete for bandwidth more than ever, where you try to find a quiet spot with a halfway decent background that won't give away too much of your private life. What we all have been caught in, of course, is a global pandemic. But we also have been caught in a digital transformation that has been accelerated more than any of us, at least I, would have thought possible just a year ago. So I think this is actually a great time to summarize what we have learned so far on this wild ride and which challenges have emerged that we will need to address in the future, and also which visions perhaps we can now paint in brighter colors than we could have a year ago. So let me start with digital transformation. What does that even mean? It basically describes a means, a method, and not an end. Digital transformation supplements or replaces analog processes with digital ones. It's as easy as that. The goal of this digital turn has most often been efficiency, and I guess that's not only true for Germany, but all over the world. We need to save time, of course, we need to use fewer resources, and most of all, we need to save money. But when organizations consider digital transformation only with efficiency in mind, they usually hit the wall sooner than later, because digital transformation is much more than just digitizing things. It's more than just sending an email instead of writing a memo. It really is about adapting processes, about creating new workflows and new roles in your work and interaction with people to share information differently. And in the end, this means that digital transformation also changes the dynamics of power. Digital transformation means for everyone who is involved in an organization that they need to fundamentally change the way they work, communicate, and also which tools they use. I'm sure you all have experienced that in the past, and so much more. It is often perceived as a burden by employees, by communities, by audiences, because it isn't designed with their own interests at heart. Digital transformation for efficiency tends to make life more complicated and much less joyful for people because they feel more of a cogwheel in the bigger system and have less wiggle room. And this leads us to what digital transformation could mean if we do it right. It could foster new forms of work, new forms of interaction and participation. Can be more inclusive for people with different needs, from a person with disabilities to a single parent who has to navigate several conflicting schedules. It can allow for more transparency by making more information accessible to everyone. And this information, again, can lead to individuals navigating work or their involvement in an organization in their own very creative way and enable them to create solutions for upcoming problems spontaneously and on their own. And through this all, if it is done right, digital transformation means more ownership, more involvement, and also more flexibility. We see some of this, of course, right now in this super fast digital turn we've all been taking, especially in the cultural sector that has been hit so hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen a lot of creativity. Musicians are now live streaming concerts from their living rooms over Twitch. Orchestras are playing remotely, but together on rhythm. On YouTube, actors use the shopping windows of closed stores and malls to give a live but distant show, and much more. Libraries had to close in some places, but people are now renting their books on their iPads and Kindles. There are two common denominators in this example, I believe. And one of them, of course, that springs to mind first is this immense amount of creativity that is out there, which is fantastic and really great to see. The other one that is maybe not as visible is a massive loss of civic spaces where we can meet, exchange, learn, and debate on our own terms. We consume culture on YouTube where algorithms are optimized to steer you to radical content. We use platforms that discriminate against people of color, like Twitter's image preview, or people who are not considered conventionally beautiful, like TikTok. We use ebook reading platforms that track each reader's progress, where they stop reading, where they skip pages, and they sell these data for profit. We here today are also an example. We are meeting on a tech platform that has recently censored several academic debate events without a public discussions about the reasons for this. One of these events, even in a really beautiful and ironic arc of recursion, was about the previous acts of censorship by this platform. Our civic life now takes place on private property, where none of us makes rules or even has the power to influence them or shape them in a way. And with this switch to private platforms, access and also visibility in the digital sphere has become a privilege. These platforms are not built to work on old phones. They need a lot of bandwidth so that some people on this world cannot afford or just don't have access to. They don't work well for people with an audiovisual impairment. The technology that we're all using right now is optimized out of economic reasons to work well for a pretty small group of people who are able-bodied, who are well off financially and socially, and they are in their 20s to their 40s. Many other people are left out. Cultural institutions like the EUNIC members have provided civic spaces in the past years, fostered dialogue. They bridged countries and continents. We heard that in the nice introductory words today. They have provided access to culture and fostered cultural understanding in so many places. And this speeded up digital transformation we are in right now. This is, I believe, taking us backwards in some respects, because none of us was prepared enough for this. What none of us wants, I think, is culture to become a matter of privilege again, but we're kind of on track for that. So this is here where we are. We have a digital transformation forced upon us, while at the same time, due to the pandemic, our resources are limited. We don't have the equivalent of civic spaces in the digital sphere where we can act as we used to. At the same time, your work, all of your work, is more important than ever now that culture can't take place the way it used to, and where schools and universities also have a really, really hard time adapting to these new realities. So where do we go from here? And which visions can guide us along the way to a perhaps brighter and more colorful future? What we can do in the short term, I believe, is pretty clear. We just need to weather this tide together. This is not the time right now to make plans for long-term changes. Instead, let's make the best of this situation. We can use it, for example, to give all these little things a try, these little changes that we always wanted to do but never managed to. Now we can dare to make small experiments. We can test our ideas for improvement and for new things often, and we can test them early. We can reach out to our audiences, to our colleagues, to our networks to get an idea how these small changes affect them, and then readapt them in a way that makes them more meaningful to all of us. We can ask the people who surround us for their ideas. We can let them create things and create spaces where they can become active. Creativity can be such a powerful way to deal with all the uncertainties that are around us right now. But not everyone has the opportunity to become creative on their own, and we can provide this platform. But Let's assume in the midterm that the pandemic is officially over at some point and our work goes back to normal. This is the time where we need to start a broader discussion about the digital sphere that we need instead of simply using the one that we got. What could digital technology look like if it is created in the public interest and with diverse needs in mind? What could a digital platform look like that is intertwined with analog experiences, where artists can freely create, where learning and sharing are central values and inclusive debates can take place? I believe that for this, we need digital civic spaces, cultural spaces that are in our hands and that can be constantly created and reshaped by the many. For this, we need a different understanding of the technology that we use. We need to understand it not as products or tools, but as public infrastructure that serves the people. Early in the pandemic, 70 civil society organizations, mostly from Germany, started an initiative which is called Strengthen Digital Civil Society by Learning from the Crisis. It contains 4 basic recommendations that I believe are important to consider if you want to move forward at all. And I'm going to post the link later in the chat so you can look them up. They are basically the low-hanging fruits that we all could take to move forward a bit. Let's imagine then that in the long term, we are successful and that we have these digital spaces in which culture and the arts can thrive. That'll be fantastic. This is also when we need to talk about digital rights, the rights we want every person to have in these civic digital spaces. A project by Nanni Jansson-Remetlo showed what these rights could be. It's called the Universal Declaration of Digital Human Rights, and I'm also going to post a link of this later. And this contains many thoughts that I think will come up in the course of this week. For example, the right to participate in online communities, the right to have access. But also, when we talk about AI, the right to freedom of online manipulation, or the right not to be judged by a machine. And also the right to non-digital access to public and also perhaps cultural services. This is a discussion that cannot be led by tech companies who right now can more or less dictate our rights in the digital sphere. We need institutions of learning and of culture to facilitate this dialogue, like you all. Organizations that have audiences in mind and all audiences in mind and have an established and trusted relationship with them. The discussion for digital transformation in the public interest also needs to transcend borders because the internet and digital services are almost global. So who could be in a better place than you all to start this discussion? I want to close my talk with a quote by Arundhati Roy, who I find very inspiring and which I find very inspiring. It's about the COVID-19 pandemic, and it states that the pandemic is a portal. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks, and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elisa. That was an excellent frame for us to think through this week. This digital manifesto or this manifesto for digital human rights and this strengthened digital civil society. I am very excited to look at those links and to know also that there has been a lot of groundwork already done in these past months on these issues. So that's an excellent place to start from. I think we have time for a question. I want to also encourage everyone out there again to please give us questions while things come to mind. Even if it's a provocative comment, that's also fine. Please use the Q&A button to do that. Oh, it looks like Elisa has just added some of these to the chat. So you can open Zoom chat right now and you can see those. I do have a question. Is that okay to ask? And we only have a few minutes, but one thing that came to mind is I wonder if tech companies are always optimizing and always in this mode of quarterly returns, and they're very, they have to make good on whatever, I don't know, income markers they have. The culture organizations have the space to look to places beyond the systemic edge, to look to maybe the digital undercommons, to look to these places where there's no financial incentive to look. I wonder if in your research, you've seen any inspiring or particularly creative examples of, let's say, digital misuse. Let's say, you're a migrant family, or let's say you're newly arriving in a new country and you don't speak the language, and you're not yet plugged in. Are there any particular examples that you think are interesting to highlight in this context?
Oh gosh, there are so many. I mean,
I'm sure.
the species are so creative. So, which one could I pick? I think one of the most basic needs would be access, right? And every other application and service builds on that, like our access to the internet. And there have been a few initiatives all over the world that find different ways to build local networks that are connected to the internet and also that are free of censorship. We've seen that here in Germany in 2015, 2016, when lots of migrants came in, and they were like literally put like into the neck of the woods where there was no internet access. And of course, these people wanted to keep in contact with their families. And there were initiatives like Freifunk. There's one similar initiative in Spain called Wi-Fi, who kind of connect from homes, from people who live around that, and do some technical magic and open up Wi-Fi hotspots in these spaces that otherwise are highly policed, in order to make people able to communicate in a meaningful way. I think that would be the best example and also the most basic example that I could give you.
That's so cool. I mean, and I think about the utopic potential of the internet that we imagined in the 90s. And a lot of it was independent users or smaller communities finding ways to use the web to their community benefit. And it sounds like, we're in another very rich time for that. There is a certain digital literacy among those who do have access to easy Wi-Fi, they have the equipment, that now we can start like soft hacking, or there must be some term for this, but we can start taking the resources that we have available to some of us and redistributing them in ad hoc ways. Elisa Lindinger, do you want to, I don't know if we have time do you want to ask one more question?
I was going to say, especially with your particular background, I mean, of course, with this increasing reliance on digital communication, we also have increasing reliance on ultimately monopolistic platforms. And I wonder if there's any alternatives you recommend that are perhaps open source or built outside of these big stack infrastructures.
Of course. I mean, the big tech companies do have a kind of a head start, and they have lots of money and lots of also people working for them and big servers. So one thing I would ask for before I mention any of these solutions, and then you start going over and complain that they don't work just as well, understand that open source is chronically underfunded, and by starting to use them and by starting to commission them, you can actually make a meaningful contribution to the open source sector. Like, this is really a proper way to support this, instead of giving your money to a company that really doesn't need it. One tool I really love is Etherpad. It's the open source variant of the Google Doc where you don't need any account, where you can write and collaborate. Nextcloud would be a classic other example to organize yourself. All the messengers, all the networks out there that are open source. So there's just so much, but also to start, I would really recommend having a look at Etherpad.
Great.
Very cool.
Thank you so much, Elisa Lindinger.
Prototype Fund, of course, is another good example of an open source entity. So definitely check it out. Also check out Superlab. 3 R's, super, like Riot Girl is like what comes to mind. In any case, Elisa is a wonderful resource. So please do seek her out and seek out the programs with which she's been involved.